My brother's lies destroyed my life. So I was disowned, rebuilt everything, and then he got what he deserved. And growing up in a quiet suburb of Kansas City, life always seemed to revolve around my older brother Evan. From as early as I could remember, he was the shining star of our family, the golden child. Even when he didn't excel, our parents, especially our father, found a way to see greatness in everything he did. I, on the other hand, was just Alex, the quiet, dependable younger son. I remember one particular day when I was around 11. Evan had come home with a grade of C on his history exam. Most families might see this as average at best, but for our parents, it was a cause for celebration. "You're improving, Evan. Keep it up," they said, beaming as though he'd won some kind of academic medal. That same week, I had brought home straight A's. My reward? A nod and a simple, "Good job, Alex." It wasn't jealousy I felt, not exactly. It was more a sense of invisibility, a realization that no matter what I did, I'd always be overshadowed. As the years went on, this dynamic didn't just persist, it grew. When I graduated high school at 17, I remember feeling proud. I had worked hard, balanced school with a part-time job at a local diner, and even made the honor roll. My parents were there at the ceremony, clapping politely. Later that evening, they handed me $200 and patted me on the back. "We're proud of you, Alex," they said, their smiles faint but present. 2 years earlier, when Evan had graduated, it had been a completely different story. Not only had they thrown him a massive party with half the neighborhood in attendance, but they also handed him the keys to a brand new car. A car. Still, I didn't let it break me. I was determined to carve out a path for myself, even if I had to do it alone. Evan, meanwhile, drifted through life. He wasn't a bad brother, not really, but he had this way of always being at the center of everything. He barely scraped by in high school, and college wasn't much better. Despite his struggles, our parents were always there to catch him, to make sure he didn't hit the ground too hard. After he dropped out of college, they helped him open a small hardware store in town. I was genuinely happy for him. By then, I was off to college in St. Louis, pursuing an MBA. Living in a different city gave me the space I'd always craved. I didn't visit home often, just for holidays and the occasional birthday. I needed the distance. During those years, I worked hard and stayed focused. I graduated on time, found a promising job back in Kansas City, and moved back, though I kept my interactions with my family limited. Evan, on the other hand, seemed to be doing well with his store. Our paths crossed occasionally, but we lived largely separate lives. Everything changed in the winter of 2007. That's when I met Rachel. Rachel was vibrant and full of life. She had this warmth about her that drew people in, me included. We met at a networking event hosted by mutual friends, and within weeks, we were inseparable. Rachel was 22 then, just starting her career in marketing. We came from the same city but had never crossed paths before. It felt like fate. We moved in together a year later, renting a modest but comfortable apartment in Chicago. Life felt like it was finally coming together for me. I had a great job, a supportive partner, and a sense of independence I'd always yearned for. It wasn't until the 2009 holidays that I introduced Rachel to my family. I was nervous, unsure of how they'd react. But to my surprise, they were welcoming, almost too welcoming. My parents were warmer than I'd seen them in years, and Evan seemed interested. I didn't think much of it at the time, though I did catch him staring at Rachel more than once during that holiday dinner. She laughed it off when I mentioned it later, brushing it aside as harmless. What started as occasional glances turned into something much more intrusive over the next few months. Evan began dropping by our apartment unannounced. At first, it was every couple of months, just enough to be annoying but not alarming. Then it became weekly. Every Friday evening, just as Rachel and I were settling in after a long week of work, there Evan would be, standing at our doorstep with some flimsy excuse about being in the neighborhood. I tried to be patient, but it became too much. One evening, after yet another unexpected visit, I confronted him. "Evan, you need to stop dropping by like this. Rachel and I need our space." He looked taken aback, almost hurt. "I'm just trying to spend time with you, Alex," he said, his voice defensive. That argument spilled over into the rest of the family. When I mentioned it to our parents, they immediately took Evan's side. He's just being friendly, they said. Don't be so harsh on your brother. After that, Evan's visits became less frequent, but no less uncomfortable. He'd show up on weekends, lingering just long enough to make his presence felt. When I proposed to Rachel in 2011, I was overjoyed. I planned a small celebration to share the news with family and close friends. My parents were thrilled, but Evan was different. He shook my hand stiffly, muttered a half-hearted congratulations, and left the gathering early. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but something about his reaction felt off. The years that followed were some of the happiest of my life. Rachel and I got married in 2013 in a beautiful outdoor ceremony. We welcomed our first daughter, Sophia, 2 years later, and our second, Mia, in 2017. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Evan, meanwhile, got married to a woman named Laura in 2014. I thought that maybe, finally, he had moved on and found his own happiness. But I was wrong. The storm was just beginning to brew. By the time Rachel and I were settling into married life, I thought the tension between Evan and me had finally eased. He seemed busy with his hardware store and his new wife, Laura. Meanwhile, Rachel and I were focused on building a future together. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Looking back, the signs were there. The first came during a family barbecue in the summer of 2014, shortly after Evan's wedding. Rachel and I arrived a little late, with Sophia in tow. As soon as we walked in, Evan's gaze locked on Rachel like a moth drawn to a flame. He barely glanced at me or even acknowledged his own wife, Laura, who stood quietly in the corner. Later that day, as I was busy helping my dad fix the grill, I noticed Evan and Rachel talking. She was polite, as she always was, but something about Evan's demeanor made my stomach twist. He was leaning in too close, smiling too much. I brushed it off as paranoia. Why would my brother do anything to hurt me? Weeks passed, then months, and Evan began finding excuses to see Rachel more often. He dropped by our home uninvited, often under the pretense of delivering something for Sophia or checking in on how we were doing. At first, Rachel didn't see the harm. He's your brother, she'd say when I expressed my frustration. He's probably just trying to be more involved. But Evan's visits started to take a toll. They weren't casual anymore. They felt calculated. He would linger for hours, inserting himself into our evenings, sharing stories that didn't seem to have any purpose other than keeping him around. One evening in early 2015, after Evan had overstayed his welcome yet again, I decided enough was enough. Evan, you can't keep coming over like this, I told him as he sat on our couch, nursing a beer. He blinked at me, feigning confusion. What do you mean? I'm just spending time with my brother and his family. No, I said firmly, you're disrupting our lives. You need to call before you come over. Better yet, let's keep these visits to once in a while. We need our privacy. Evan's expression darkened. He stood abruptly, placing his beer on the coffee table with more force than necessary. I see how it is, he said, his tone sharp. Fine. If you don't want me around, I'll stay away. The fallout was immediate. Evan complained to our parents, painting me as the ungrateful younger brother who didn't value family. My mom called the next day, her voice heavy with disappointment. Alex, how could you say that to Evan? He's just trying to be close to you. You're pushing him away. I held my ground, but the damage was done. Evan backed off, but not entirely. He still found ways to insert himself into our lives, albeit less frequently. In 2016, Laura reached out to me unexpectedly. We hadn't spoken much, despite her being my sister-in-law, so her message caught me off guard. She wanted to meet for coffee. When we met, Laura looked exhausted, as though she hadn't slept in days. She wasted no time getting to the point. Evan's obsession with Rachel is tearing us apart, she said bluntly. My heart sank. What are you talking about? She sighed, her hands trembling as she stirred her coffee. He talks about her constantly. He compares me to her. It's like he's in love with her. I didn't know what to say. Hearing my fears confirmed by someone else was like a punch to the gut. I apologized to Laura, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. I didn't know how to fix something like this. That night, I confronted Rachel. She seemed shocked by Laura's claims, but admitted that Laura had always been cold toward her. Do you think there's any truth to what she's saying? I asked. Rachel shook her head. Alex, I'm your wife. I love you, not Evan. If he's crossing boundaries, that's on him, not me. Her reassurance should have been enough, but it wasn't. Something still felt off. I decided to confront Evan directly. It was late one evening when I called him, asking him to meet me at a nearby diner. When he arrived, he looked defensive, as if he already knew what the conversation was about. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Evan feigned ignorance. Doing what? Obsessing over Rachel, I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. Laura told me everything. Why can't you just leave us alone? Evan's face flushed red. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, but then he laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You think you're so perfect, don't you? He said. The golden boy who went off and made something of himself. Meanwhile, I'm stuck running a dead-end store while you have everything. Success, a family, a beautiful wife. His words hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about Rachel. It was about years of resentment, years of feeling second best. You're my brother, I said, my voice shaking. I've never thought of you as less than me. But this is unacceptable. Evan stormed out of the diner without another word. I didn't see him for weeks after that. In 2017, Rachel and I welcomed our second daughter, Mia. Life seemed to settle into a fragile rhythm. Evan stayed out of our lives, and for a while, I thought we could finally move forward. But the peace didn't last. In the summer of 2018, my world came crashing down in the most unexpected way. It started with a phone call from my father, his voice tense and unfamiliar. Alex, you need to come over. Now. When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere was suffocating. My mother was comforting Rachel, who was in tears. Several relatives were gathered, their expressions a mix of anger and pity. What's going on? I asked, my heart pounding. My father stepped forward, his face hard. We know what you did, Alex. What are you talking about? He handed me a phone. On the screen were screenshots of a conversation, explicit messages that appeared to be from me, sent to a woman named Samantha, an old acquaintance from high school. She claims you assaulted her, my father said coldly. And these messages prove it. I was speechless. The messages were fake, the accusations baseless, but no one believed me. Not Rachel, not my parents, not anyone in that room. I tried to defend myself, but it was no use. By the end of the day, I had lost everything. My family, my reputation, my home. As I left my parents' house that evening, I saw Evan standing by the driveway, a smirk playing on his lips. In that moment, I knew. He was behind it all, and I had no idea how to fight back. I will never forget that suffocating summer evening in 2018. The accusations leveled against me in my parents' living room didn't just shatter my world, they obliterated it. My father, the man I'd spent my whole life trying to earn respect from, stood there, looking at me like I was some kind of monster. My mother refused to meet my eyes. Rachel, my wife, the woman I had built a life with, sat on the couch, clutching Sophia and Mia. Her tears were relentless, her face a mask of heartbreak and betrayal. I didn't do this, I said, my voice barely holding steady. Those messages are fake. I would never hurt anyone, least of all Samantha, but it didn't matter. The screenshots of supposed messages from me were too damning. Samantha had alleged that I followed her to her car after a party and assaulted her. According to her, I then sent threatening texts to keep her quiet. The details were grotesque, horrifying. They didn't just paint me as a criminal, they painted me as a monster. When I tried to explain that I hadn't even spoken to Samantha in years, my father's patience snapped. He slapped me hard across the face, his anger echoing through the room. You've disgraced this family, he said through gritted teeth. Get out of my house. You're no son of mine. Rachel's words cut even deeper. We're done, Alex. I can't even look at you right now. They refused to listen. I was told to leave immediately. My father followed me to my apartment later that evening, silently packing bags for Rachel and the girls. I begged him to stop, to at least listen, but he acted as if I wasn't even there. When he finished, he looked me in the eye one last time and said, "Don't come near them again. And if you even try, I'll call the police myself. I was left in a hollow, empty apartment, too stunned to cry. Evan's involvement in all this wasn't immediately obvious, but his smirk as I left my parents' house lingered in my mind. Then, just hours after I'd been cast out, he posted the screenshots and Samantha's story in the family's WhatsApp group, ensuring everyone in our extended family saw it. Within days, I became a pariah. Friends who had known me for years cut me off, texting me to say they were disgusted, or that they never expected this from me. My coworkers whispered behind my back. My boss called me into his office, suggesting I resign to avoid making things messy for everyone involved. Even if there's no police involvement, he said, the damage is done. I can't keep you here. I had no choice but to quit. By mid-August, I was a shell of a man. My savings were dwindling, my reputation was in ruins, and my marriage was over. I had been served divorce papers and a formal letter of disownment from my parents. Evan, of course, was there to deliver the final blow. One drunken evening, I went back to my parents' house. I wasn't thinking clearly. Grief and anger clouded my judgment. I wanted answers. I wanted to scream at the people who had so easily discarded me. But when I arrived, Evan was waiting for me. He didn't let me inside. Instead, he punched me repeatedly, calling me a disgrace, a parasite, a failure. Blood streamed down my face as he berated me, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of Rachel and my father, who watched silently from a distance. I staggered away that night, collapsing in a heap on the sidewalk a few blocks from their house. I had never felt more alone. The divorce finalized in January 2019. I had no job, no family, no home, and no purpose. I thought about confronting Samantha, but the laws in my country were heavily skewed in favor of the accuser in cases like this. Without solid proof of my innocence, even a single phone call could result in prison time. In February 2019, I suffered a serious injury after a drunken fall and had to spend weeks in recovery. My emergency contact was still listed as Rachel. When the hospital called her, she hung up. Not a single person came to visit me. By March, I had nothing left. I sold my remaining furniture, paid off my overdue rent, and packed up what little I had left. I moved 2 hours away to a city where no one knew me, hoping for a fresh start. But the fresh start wasn't immediate. It was more of a slow, painful crawl. I spent months searching for work, battling depression and suicidal thoughts. I drank heavily, drowning in self-pity. I would wake up drenched in sweat, plagued by nightmares of being trapped, screaming, as everyone I loved turned their backs on me. The turning point came in July 2019. While walking aimlessly through a crowded street, I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Liam Rogers, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Liam was quiet and reserved back in school, but he greeted me warmly that day. He asked me how I'd been, and for the first time in months, I found myself opening up to someone. Over drinks that evening, Liam told me he was starting his own management consulting firm and was looking for reliable team members. I laughed bitterly, telling him I was far from reliable, but Liam wasn't deterred. He insisted we talk more, inviting me to meet his business partner, Kyle, 2 days later. When we met, I laid everything on the table. My disownment, the accusations, the fact that I had nothing left. To my surprise, both Liam and Kyle listened without judgment. As long as there's no criminal record, Liam said, that's enough for me. We'll run a background check just to be sure, but if you're clean, I'd like to have you on board. I agreed, grateful for the chance. 2 weeks later, after a clean background check, Liam called to officially welcome me to the team. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had hope. Work became my lifeline. I threw myself into it, desperate to prove I was still capable of something. At Liam's suggestion, I started therapy. I also joined a gym, pouring my frustration and anger into a punching bag. Over time, I began to feel stronger, physically, emotionally, mentally. By the end of 2019, our business was thriving. I moved into a better apartment and started reclaiming small pieces of my life. Liam and Kyle became like brothers to me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel completely alone. But even as I rebuilt myself, the shadows of my past lingered. Evan, Samantha, and the lies they had spun were never far from my thoughts. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself one thing. I would find a way to set the record straight. This wasn't over. By the start of 2020, I was beginning to feel like a semblance of my old self again. Work at Liam's consultancy firm was going well, and our small team of 3 was growing closer with every project. Liam had a knack for leadership, and Kyle was like the older brother I'd always wanted. We worked long hours but found time to laugh and support each other through life's ups and downs. Therapy was another lifeline. My therapist helped me sort through the tangled emotions I had carried for years. The betrayal by my family, the destruction of my reputation, and the isolation that followed. Slowly, I started to let go of the guilt and shame that had consumed me. At the gym, I channeled my frustration into the punching bag. My body grew stronger, and with it, so did my confidence. By the end of the year, I had gained nearly 25 pounds of muscle. The gym wasn't just a place to exercise. It became a sanctuary where I could work through my anger and grief. It was around this time that I met Diana. She worked as a barista at a coffee shop I frequented near the office. Diana was half Italian, half Korean, and her warm smile stood out even during the city's coldest days. For weeks, we exchanged small talk while I ordered my coffee, but I never worked up the courage to ask her out. One afternoon, as Liam and I sat at the coffee shop discussing a project, he noticed Diana glancing in my direction. "She's been looking over here for the past 10 minutes, Liam said with a grin. "You should talk to her." "I don't think so," I replied, brushing it off. "She's just being polite." Liam shook his head. "Alex, when are you going to realize you're worth more than you give yourself credit for? Go ask her out." Encouraged by Liam's words, I approached Diana before we left. I stammered through an invitation to grab drinks, fully expecting her to say no. To my surprise, she smiled and said, "I'd love to." Our first date was simple but perfect. We talked for hours over drinks, sharing stories about our lives and dreams for the future. Still, I knew I couldn't start a relationship without being honest about my past. On our second date, I told Diana everything. I explained the accusations, the fallout with my family, and the struggles I had faced since. I expected her to walk away, as others had before, but she didn't. Instead, Diana took my hand and said, "I can tell you're a good man, Alex. I want to know you. Not the version of you that other people tried to destroy." Her words brought me to tears. For the first time in years, someone saw me for who I was, not the lies that had been told about me. Our relationship grew slowly but steadily. Diana was kind, understanding, and patient, even on my worst days. She encouraged me to keep pushing forward, to keep rebuilding my life. In 2021, as the world began to emerge from the grip of the pandemic, Diana moved in with me. She had lost her job at the coffee shop, and I suggested she use the opportunity to pursue her dream of opening a small food business. With the help of her parents, Diana launched a cloud kitchen specializing in Italian-Korean fusion dishes. The business took off quickly, and she found fulfillment in doing what she loved. Watching her succeed brought me a joy I hadn't felt in years. But even as things improved, the ghosts of my past continued to haunt me. I still had nightmares, vivid, suffocating dreams where I relived the betrayal and rejection I had endured. Diana was always there to hold me when I woke up shaking, her presence a reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. In early 2024, Diana shared life-changing news. She was pregnant. The news brought a whirlwind of emotions: joy, fear, grief, and hope all rolled into one. I was ecstatic at the thought of becoming a father again, but I couldn't help but mourn the years I had lost with Sophia and Mia. I wondered how I would explain it all to my child one day. The lies, the accusations, the fractured relationships. Diana sensed my unease and reassured me with her steady presence. "This baby is a new beginning, Alex," she said. "We're building a life together, and nothing from the past can take that away." A few months later, as we prepared for the arrival of our child, my phone rang late one evening. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Hello?" I said cautiously. There was a pause, followed by a shaky, tear-filled voice. "Alex, it's Samantha." Hearing her voice was like being hit with a wave of anger and grief. I clenched the phone tightly, ready to hang up, but Diana's hand on my arm stopped me. "Let's hear her out," Diana said softly, putting the call on speaker. Samantha, sobbing, began to confess. "I lied," she said. "Everything I said about you was a lie. Evan made me do it. He manipulated me, and I went along with it because I thought I loved him. But I can't live with the guilt anymore." As she spoke, the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. Evan had orchestrated the entire scheme, using Samantha as a pawn to destroy me. He had created fake screenshots, fabricated the assault story, and fed it all to my family. Diana stayed calm, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Why are you telling us this now?" she asked. Samantha explained that her fiancé, Mark, had recently learned the truth during a drunken confession. He had insisted that she come clean, not just to him, but to me as well. By the time Samantha finished speaking, I was shaking with a mix of fury and relief. Diana called Liam, who suggested we arrange a meeting with my lawyer to document Samantha's confession. 3 days later, we met at my lawyer's office. Samantha looked frail and defeated, her fiancé by her side. As she recounted the entire scheme on camera, I wavered between tears and rage. Evan's obsession with Rachel had driven him to destroy my life, and Samantha had been complicit in every step. After the meeting, Diana hugged me tightly. "You'll get through this," she whispered. "You've already come so far." The truth was out, but the battle wasn't over. I had decisions to make, about Evan, about my family, and about the life I was rebuilding with Diana. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance to reclaim what had been stolen from me. The weight of Samantha's confession stayed with me long after our meeting at the lawyer's office. She had admitted everything. How Evan had manipulated her, how the fabricated screenshots and accusations were his doing, and how she'd played along because she thought she loved him. Hearing it all laid bare gave me a sense of vindication, but it didn't bring peace. Not yet. Diana was my anchor during those days. She reassured me, helped me process the overwhelming flood of emotions, and reminded me of what truly mattered: our life together and the child we were bringing into the world. But even as we planned our wedding and prepared for the arrival of our baby, I knew I couldn't move forward without addressing the past. 3 weeks before our wedding, I made the first move. I called Samantha. My voice was calm, though my chest tightened with anger as I spoke to her. "I need you to tell Emily," I said. "You owe her the truth, just as much as you owed it to me. If you don't, I'll make sure she finds out another way." Samantha hesitated, but eventually agreed. A few days later, she went to Emily's office and told her everything. The next morning, I received a message from Emily. For the first time in nearly 8 years, she reached out directly. Her text was brief, asking if we could talk. I waited until I was home with Diana before I responded. Together, we sat in the living room, and I called Emily. She answered almost immediately, and the sound of her voice, a mix of sobs and apologies, hit me like a tidal wave. "Alex, I'm so sorry," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I should have believed you. I should have listened. I don't even know how to make this right." I kept my tone measured, though my heart ached. "You didn't even give me a chance, Emily. You cut me out of my daughter's lives. You sided with Evan, and now you're telling me this? After all these years." She cried harder, but I didn't let my anger consume me. Instead, I asked about Sophia and Mia. Emily told me they were doing well, but admitted they had grown up believing Evan was their father. The conversation turned heavier when Emily revealed another bombshell. She had married Evan a year after our divorce and had a daughter with him. The admission stunned me. It was as if every suspicion I'd ever had about Evan's motives had been confirmed in one painful instant. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I need you to know the truth," she said. "I've already told my parents and the rest of the family what Samantha confessed. They all want to reach out to you, but I insisted on apologizing first." I let out a bitter laugh. "Your apology doesn't erase what happened, Emily. I've spent years trying to rebuild my life because of what you and Evan did to me." Emily tried to justify her actions, saying Evan had been her support system during those difficult years. But I wasn't interested in her explanations. Instead, I made my intentions clear. "I don't care what happens between you and Evan. I said. My priority is Sophia and Mia. If you want to make amends, you'll let me be a part of their lives. But beyond that, there's nothing left to fix between us. She agreed, and we made plans to meet with the girls the following weekend. When the day arrived, Diana and I met Emily and the girls at a park. Emily had dressed professionally, likely trying to make a good impression, but the strain of her life was evident. Sophia and Mia, now teenagers, were almost unrecognizable to me. They were taller, more mature, but still carried traces of the little girls I had once known. I greeted them cautiously, unsure how they would react. To my surprise, they hugged me, though their expressions were conflicted. They had grown up knowing Evan as their father, and learning the truth about me had undoubtedly shaken them. We spent hours at the park, talking and catching up. There were tears, laughter, and moments of awkward silence. Diana, always the peacemaker, made an effort to connect with the girls, reassuring them that they were welcome in our lives. By nightfall, Emily and I were sitting on a bench, watching the girls play in the distance. She admitted that her marriage to Evan was falling apart. The pandemic had forced his landscaping business to shut down, and his bitterness had consumed their relationship. I'm divorcing him, she said quietly, not because of you, but because I can't live with him anymore. Her words didn't bring me any satisfaction. Evan's downfall was his own doing, and I had no interest in reveling in his misery. My focus was on moving forward, not looking back. Over the next few weeks, I began attending family therapy sessions with Sophia and Mia. It was slow progress, but it was a start. Diana supported me every step of the way, despite her own challenges with the pregnancy. Meanwhile, my extended family bombarded me with messages, pleading for forgiveness. Even my parents reached out, expressing regret for how they had treated me. But their apologies felt hollow. I still had the letter they'd sent with the divorce papers, the letter disowning me. They're not my parents anymore, I told Diana one evening. I'll talk to them when I'm ready, but on my terms, not theirs. As our wedding day approached, I felt a sense of closure beginning to form. Diana and I exchanged vows in a small, intimate ceremony with Liam and Kyle as my best men. The love and support I felt that day were unlike anything I had experienced before. During our honeymoon in Europe, I finally allowed myself to relax. Diana and I explored new cities, tasted incredible food, and talked about the future. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. But even on that honeymoon, I couldn't escape the nightmares. My therapist had warned me that true closure would only come when I confronted my past head-on. In July, after much deliberation, I made one final decision. I contacted Emily and told her I wanted to meet my parents. I need to hear it from them, I said. I need to know why they chose to believe Evan over me. The meeting was tense, emotional, and raw. My parents apologized profusely, their regret evident. They begged for a chance to rebuild our relationship, but I made it clear that it wouldn't be easy. Forgiveness takes time, I said. You broke my trust. If you want to fix this, you'll have to earn it. As I left their home that day, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The scars of their betrayal would never fully heal, but I was ready to take the next step. My focus now is on the family I've built with Diana and the relationships I'm rebuilding with Sophia and Mia. The past will always be a part of me, but it no longer defines me. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm finally free.